The more humanity mastered the outer world, the more it seemed to lose sight of the inner one. Empires expanded, yet fear endured. Wealth multiplied, yet contentment remained elusive. Knowledge increased, yet wisdom became increasingly rare. Each generation believed it stood closer to fulfillment than the last, yet the same anxieties, the same desires, and the same questions returned. As constant as the rising sun, the ancient masters observed this pattern and reached a remarkable conclusion. Humanity's greatest struggle was never a lack of resources, power, or opportunity. It was forgetfulness. We had forgotten the invisible laws that govern the mind, the timeless principles that quietly shape perception, character, and experience. According to the forgotten Hermetic tradition, this forgetfulness was the source of suffering. A person who does not understand the movements of the mind becomes a servant to fear, habit, and illusion, mistaking passing appearances for ultimate reality. Such a life is driven by reaction rather than understanding, by circumstance rather than conscious choice. But the manuscripts also carried a promise. They taught that every human being possesses the capacity to awaken, not through escaping the world, but through learning to see it with new eyes. They declared that every hardship conceals a lesson, every obstacle hides a doorway, and every moment of confusion can become the beginning of deeper understanding. For the sages who preserved these teachings, the greatest discovery was neither a hidden treasure nor a forgotten kingdom. It was the realization that the transformation humanity sought in the world must first begin within the one who perceives it. This is where our journey begins. As we journey through the Hermetic Codex, keep one thought quietly alive in your mind. Perhaps the answers humanity has pursued across millennia were never truly lost. Perhaps they have simply been waiting for someone willing to read them with new eyes. Chapter 1. Hermes Trismegistus and the Divine Mind. Long before empires rose and disappeared beneath the sands of history, before libraries were consumed by fire and kingdoms faded into legend, there existed a mysterious figure whose name echoed through nearly every ancient school of wisdom. The Greeks called him Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. Some believed he was a single enlightened sage. Others believed he represented generations of initiates who preserved sacred knowledge across centuries. Whether historical or symbolic, his influence became so profound that philosophers, mystics, and scholars regarded his teachings as a bridge between humanity and the deepest mysteries of existence. Among the writings attributed to this tradition, none proved more influential than the Corpus Hermeticum. These texts did not promise wealth, power, or miraculous abilities. Instead, they offered something far more demanding and infinitely more valuable. They invited human beings to know themselves. According to Hermetic philosophy, every journey toward understanding begins with one astonishing realization. Beneath the endless movement of thoughts, emotions, memories, and desires exists an awareness that quietly witnesses them all. This awareness was believed to participate in what Hermes called the Divine Mind, the universal intelligence from which all existence unfolds. This idea was not unique to Hermeticism. The sages of the Upanishads spoke of the eternal self beyond personality. Buddhist teachers pointed toward pure awareness beyond attachment. Later philosophers and contemplatives across many cultures described the same mysterious presence using different words. Though their languages differed, their direction remained remarkably similar: turn inward, The ancients believed humanity's greatest mistake was not ignorance of the outer world, but forgetfulness of the inner one. Most people spent their lives mastering occupations, possessions, and reputations while remaining strangers to the consciousness experiencing them. One who conquers kingdoms but not himself remains a servant. The divine mind was never presented as a distant deity watching humanity from beyond the heavens. It was described as the living intelligence that sustains every breath, every season, every unfolding law of nature. Human consciousness was not isolated from it, but capable of recognizing its participation within it. Imagine standing beside a vast ocean. A single wave appears separate. It rises, travels for a moment, and disappears. Yet, throughout its existence, it never ceased being the ocean itself. It possessed its own shape, but not a separate substance. Hermetic wisdom suggested that human consciousness resembles that wave. We experience ourselves as isolated individuals, yet our deepest nature remains inseparable from the greater reality from which we arise. This realization changes everything. Fear softens, competition loses its grip. Life ceases to feel like endless survival and begins to resemble participation in something infinitely larger than the individual self. Yet this understanding cannot be borrowed from books. It must become experience. For this reason, ancient mystery schools required years of preparation before revealing deeper teachings. Students first learned silence, discipline, observation, humility, and self-restraint. These practices were not arbitrary rituals. They trained the mind to become clear enough to recognize truths that constant distraction concealed. The first lesson given to every sincere seeker was surprisingly simple. Observe yourself. Notice your thoughts without immediately believing them. Notice your emotions without becoming imprisoned by them. Notice your reactions before acting upon them. The observer is wiser than the impulse. Modern psychology quietly confirms much of this ancient insight. The ability to observe thoughts, rather than automatically identify with them, is associated with greater emotional regulation, clearer judgment, and increased psychological flexibility. Ancient sages discovered through contemplation what modern science continues to explore through research. Awareness creates freedom. Without awareness, habit governs life. Hermetic teachings also presented a breathtaking image of reality itself. They suggested that the visible world is not separate from consciousness, but reflects it in subtle ways. This does not mean every event is personally chosen or magically created. Rather, our perceptions, interpretations, attitudes, and responses continuously shape the quality of the life we experience. Two people may encounter the same storm. One discovers despair, the other discovers resilience. The rain remains identical. The consciousness meeting it does not. Thus the world becomes a living reflection. Our fears influence what we notice. Our hopes influence what we pursue. Our assumptions quietly guide countless decisions until the life we build begins resembling the inner landscape from which those choices emerged. As within, so life unfolds. The seeker gradually discovers that transformation begins neither in distant circumstances nor in controlling other people. It begins with the invisible conversation continually taking place within the mind. Every belief repeated becomes perception. Perception guides action. Action becomes habit. Habit shapes character. Character gradually becomes destiny. The Hermetic path, therefore, never begins by changing the world. It begins by illuminating the consciousness through which the world is experienced. His story preserves an enduring tradition surrounding the temples of ancient Egypt. It tells of a young scholar who traveled hundreds of miles seeking the wisdom of Hermes. Expecting secret diagrams, hidden rituals, and miraculous formulas, he eagerly requested the highest teaching from an elderly initiate. The old master silently handed him a polished bronze mirror. "Study this." The young man looked confused. "I came seeking the mysteries of the universe." The initiate smiled gently. "You have." Perplexed, the student stared at his own reflection. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Each morning he returned to the mirror, gradually observing not only his face but his impatience, pride, fears, ambitions, and restless thoughts. Slowly he realized that every obstacle he blamed upon the world first existed within himself. Only then did the elder speak again. "The universe has always reflected the one who looks into it, and the first mystery was never hidden in the stars. It was hidden in the one searching for them." Chapter 2. The 7 Hermetic Principles. Having discovered that consciousness participates in the divine mind, the ancient Hermetic teachers offered 7 principles they believed described the deeper patterns through which existence continually unfolds. These principles were never intended as superstition or magical formulas. They were observations, maps inviting careful reflection upon life itself. The first and most foundational principle is mentalism. The all is mind. This profound statement does not suggest that physical reality is imaginary. Rather, it proposes that consciousness stands at the heart of human experience. Everything we create, cities, music, civilizations, inventions, friendships, first appears as an idea before becoming action. Every cathedral began as imagination. Every journey began as intention. Mind precedes manifestation. The second principle is correspondence, expressed through the famous phrase, "As above, so below. As within, so without." Patterns repeat across different levels of existence. The order cultivated within one's thoughts often influences outward behavior. Calm minds tend to create calmer responses. Disordered habits frequently produce disordered lives. The mirror responds. The third principle is vibration. Nothing remains completely still. Every heartbeat, every breath, every changing season reminds us that existence is movement. Human emotions also possess rhythm. Fear narrows perception. Gratitude broadens it. Hope energizes action. Despair weakens initiative. While ancient Hermetic language differs from modern science, both recognize that change is constant. Life flows, resistance exhausts. The fourth principle is polarity. Opposites often exist as different expressions along the same continuum rather than completely separate realities. Night gradually becomes dawn. Cold becomes warmth. Fear may become courage. Hatred may soften into understanding. Ancient teachers believed transformation occurs not by denying one state, but by consciously moving toward its opposite through repeated practice. Character shifts gradually. The fifth principle is rhythm. Everything moves in cycles. The tides rise and fall. The moon waxes and wanes. Civilizations flourish and decline. Human motivation also follows seasons of expansion and contraction. Wisdom lies not in expecting permanent excitement, but in learning to remain steady through both abundance and difficulty. Winter prepares spring. Patience honors rhythm. The sixth principle is cause and effect. Nothing meaningful appears entirely without consequence. Small choices accumulate. Repeated habits become predictable outcomes. The ancients urged students to stop viewing themselves merely as victims of circumstance and begin recognizing the quiet causes continually planted through daily decisions. Today's actions become tomorrow's harvest. Finally comes the seventh principle, creative gender. Hermetic philosophy described creation as arising through complementary forces, often symbolized as masculine and feminine, not primarily as biological categories, but as universal qualities: initiative and receptivity, reason and intuition, structure and creativity, action and contemplation. Healthy living requires both. An architect imagines before building. A gardener prepares soil before planting. Ideas require expression. Action requires wisdom. Creation emerges through balance. These principles become meaningful only when applied. Mentalism encourages examining one's assumptions before reacting. Correspondence invites caring for one's inner world with the same attention given to external success. Vibration reminds us that emotional states influence relationships. Polarity teaches reconciliation rather than rigid division. Rhythm encourages patience during difficult seasons. Cause and effect inspires responsibility for daily choices. Creative gender invites harmony between thoughtful reflection and courageous action. Together they form not merely a philosophy, but a practical discipline of living consciously. The Hermetic student gradually discovers that extraordinary transformation rarely arrives through dramatic moments. It grows through ordinary awareness, practiced consistently. One thoughtful response, one courageous decision, one honest conversation, one act of gratitude, one habit repeated. These seemingly insignificant moments quietly reshape an entire life. Ancient tradition tells of a respected Egyptian artisan commissioned to construct sacred pillars for a temple dedicated to wisdom. A curious apprentice noticed that the master spent as much time examining the foundation stones as carving the visible columns. Impatient, the apprentice asked, "Why devote such care to what no one will ever see?" The old craftsman placed one rough stone beside another and replied, "If the unseen is crooked, the visible cannot remain straight." Years later, when the temple stood complete, while many surrounding buildings had already begun to crumble, the apprentice finally understood. The strength everyone admired above the ground had been determined long before by what remained hidden beneath it. So it is with human life. Character is the unseen foundation. Consciousness is the hidden architect. And the 7 Hermetic Principles are not distant mysteries reserved for ancient initiates. They are quiet reminders that every lasting transformation begins where few people think to look. Within. Chapter 3. The Veil of Illusion. Every great wisdom tradition begins with the same unsettling question. What if the world you believe you see is not the world as it truly is? The Hermetic initiates spoke of veils. The sages of India called it Maya, the great illusion. Plato described humanity as prisoners watching shadows upon the wall of a cave. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when we mistake appearances for ultimate reality. Though separated by geography and centuries, each tradition pointed toward a similar insight. Human beings rarely encounter reality directly. Instead, they experience interpretations shaped by memory, emotion, expectation, and desire. The eyes may see. The mind decides what is seen. This is the veil of illusion. Illusion does not necessarily mean that the physical world is unreal. Rather, it means our understanding of the world is incomplete. We mistake the surface for the substance. We confuse passing emotions with permanent truth. We believe our first impressions are reality itself, forgetting that every perception is filtered through the invisible lens of consciousness. A frightened traveler hears danger in every sound of the forest. A peaceful traveler hears birdsong in the very same place. The forest has not changed. Only the observer has. This realization formed one of the earliest lessons in Hermetic philosophy. The seeker was taught that before attempting to understand the universe, he must first understand the instrument through which the universe is perceived, the mind itself. Most people spend their lives polishing the window without realizing the glass through which they look has already become clouded. Ancient teachers insisted that every fear, prejudice, attachment, and assumption quietly colors perception. They become invisible spectacles through which we interpret every conversation, every opportunity, every challenge, and every relationship. The veil is rarely outside us. It is within us. Modern psychology echoes this ancient observation. Cognitive biases shape attention long before conscious reasoning begins. Expectations influence memory. Emotions alter judgment. Two witnesses can observe the same event and sincerely remember it differently, because perception is never a passive recording of reality. It is an active construction. The ancients understood this without laboratories. They learned it through disciplined observation. Hermetic schools therefore encourage students to cultivate what they called inner seeing. Rather than immediately reacting to every event, they practiced watching their own responses first. Anger was examined before being expressed. Fear was questioned before being obeyed. Praise was received without intoxication. Criticism was heard without immediate defense. Observation creates space. Reaction closes it. Imagine standing beside a perfectly still lake at sunrise. When the water is calm, the surrounding mountains reflect with astonishing clarity. But when the surface is disturbed by wind, the reflection fractures into distortion. The mountains themselves have not changed. Only the condition of the water has altered what can be perceived. Hermes used similar imagery to teach the condition of the human mind. A restless mind reflects reality poorly. A quiet mind reflects it faithfully. For this reason, silence occupied such an important place in the ancient mystery schools. Silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was the gradual calming of internal noise. The endless stream of judgments, fears, comparisons, regrets, and imagined futures that continually pull awareness away from direct experience. The quieter the mind becomes, the thinner the veil grows. This is why symbols held extraordinary importance in Hermetic teaching. Ancient wisdom was rarely communicated through straightforward instruction alone. Instead, temples were filled with sacred geometry, mythological figures, celestial imagery, and layered allegories. To the casual observer, these appeared decorative. To the prepared student, they became living teachings, symbols concealed to reveal. A seed appears lifeless until placed within fertile soil. Only then does its hidden life emerge. Likewise, ancient symbols were designed to awaken understanding gradually rather than deliver information instantly. Their meaning unfolded according to the maturity of the seeker. The serpent represented renewal. The phoenix represented transformation. The lotus represented awakening beyond the mud from which it grows. These images reminded students that life's deepest truths cannot always be explained. They must often be experienced. The greatest illusion, however, is not found in external appearances. It is found in identification. People begin to believe they are their profession, their possessions, their achievements, their failures, their reputation, or even their thoughts. Slowly, the temporary becomes mistaken for the eternal. The Hermetic masters gently warned against this confusion. You possess thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You experience emotion. You are not your emotion. You play many roles. You are greater than every role. This shift changes the entire direction of life. Instead of being carried helplessly by every emotional current, the seeker begins standing upon the shore, watching the river flow while remaining rooted in something deeper. Freedom begins here. One ancient exercise instructed students to pause before every important decision and ask 3 simple questions. What am I seeing? What am I assuming? What remains true if my assumptions disappear? Such questions interrupted unconscious reactions and gradually strengthened wisdom. They still can. Ancient tradition tells of a young initiate who entered an Egyptian temple eager to receive secret knowledge. Expecting mystical ceremonies, he was instead guided into a vast chamber, whose walls were entirely covered with polished bronze mirrors. Lamps illuminated every surface until countless reflections surrounded him. Confused, he asked the elder priest, "Where is the hidden wisdom?" The old man smiled. "It surrounds you." The student searched every wall but found only endless reflections of himself. Days later, exhausted by frustration, he finally became still. As his breathing slowed, he noticed something remarkable. The mirrors had never imprisoned him. They had only revealed every movement he made. The priest quietly approached. The world does the same. It reflects before it judges. Learn to understand the reflection before trying to change it. Only then did the young initiate realize that the greatest illusion had never been the mirrors. It had been believing the reflections were someone else. Chapter 4. The Living Universe. After the seeker begins seeing beyond appearances, Hermes introduces perhaps the most profound teaching within the entire Hermetic tradition: the all is mind. These 4 words have inspired contemplation for nearly 2,000 years because they invite a radically different way of understanding existence. They do not ask us to deny the physical world or pretend that matter does not exist. Instead, they encourage us to recognize that consciousness stands at the center of every human experience. The world we encounter is never separated from the mind that encounters it. Reality becomes meaningful only because consciousness illuminates it. Without awareness, beauty remains unseen, music remains unheard, love remains unfelt, meaning remains undiscovered. Consciousness is the light through which existence becomes experience. Hermetic philosophy described the universe not as a dead machine operating blindly, but as a living intelligence expressing itself through countless forms. Stars, rivers, forests, seasons, and human beings were understood as participants within a vast, interconnected order. Every part belonged to something immeasurably greater than itself. The ancients referred to this unity as the All, not merely a distant creator, not merely nature, but the living source from which all existence continually unfolds. Modern language may describe this differently. Scientists investigate physical laws. Psychologists examine cognition. Philosophers debate consciousness itself. While their methods differ from Hermetic metaphysics, they also recognize that human beings never interact with raw reality directly. What we experience is reality as interpreted through the nervous system, memory, attention, expectation, and meaning. Matter exists. Experience interprets matter. This distinction is essential. Imagine receiving identical news on 2 different days. On one day, you are rested, hopeful, and emotionally balanced. You interpret the information calmly. On another day, exhausted and anxious, the same words feel overwhelming. The external event has not changed, perception has. The Hermetic masters encouraged students to understand this distinction, not so they could escape reality, but so they could participate in it more wisely. A person who understands perception gains the ability to respond consciously rather than mechanically. Awareness becomes participation, reaction becomes choice. This principle transforms ordinary life. Relationships improve when assumptions are questioned before accusations are spoken. Work becomes more meaningful when purpose replaces resentment. Health benefits when attention shifts from constant fear toward consistent care and disciplined habits. The world itself has not magically changed. The observer has matured. The Hermetic path, therefore, never encouraged fantasy or wishful thinking. It demanded responsibility. If consciousness shapes experience, then cultivating clarity becomes one of life's highest responsibilities. Every belief examined, every fear understood, every habit refined contributes to a richer participation in reality. The mind becomes a garden. Neglected thoughts become weeds. Nurtured thoughts become harvest. This metaphor appears repeatedly throughout ancient wisdom, because gardens do not flourish through wishing. They flourish through attentive cultivation. Likewise, consciousness matures through repeated observation, reflection, humility, and disciplined action. The first practical reflection, given to many Hermetic students, was beautifully simple. Several times each day they paused and silently asked, "What is creating my experience right now? Is it the event itself, or the story I am telling about the event?" The question alone often dissolved unnecessary suffering. It reminded them that while circumstances cannot always be controlled, interpretation remains surprisingly flexible. The story changes everything. This is not denial. It is discernment. As seekers deepened their practice, they discovered something extraordinary. The more consciously they participated in life, the more meaningful life appeared. Ordinary conversations became opportunities for compassion. Difficult seasons became teachers rather than enemies. Success became stewardship instead of pride. Failure became instruction instead of identity. The universe gradually ceased resembling a battlefield. It became a classroom. Every experience carried a lesson. Every relationship revealed character. Every challenge invited greater awareness. Ancient records preserve the story of an elderly Hermetic teacher who often walked through the marketplace with his students. One afternoon, a wealthy merchant loudly mocked the old philosopher, accusing him of wasting his life on invisible ideas rather than profitable business. The students expected their master to argue. Instead, he simply smiled and continued walking. Later, one disciple finally asked, "Did his insults not disturb you?" The old teacher pointed toward a nearby pool reflecting the evening sky. "When the water is clear," he said, "the stars appear without effort. When the water is disturbed, even the stars seem broken." The sky never changed, only the surface did. The students looked silently into the still water. At that moment they understood. The living universe had never been asking them to control every event. It had been inviting them to cultivate a consciousness capable of seeing clearly through them all. Chapter 5. The Path of Mental Alchemy. Among all the teachings preserved within the Hermetic tradition, none was considered more practical or more transformative than the art known as mental alchemy. To the casual observer, alchemy appeared to concern itself with furnaces, metals, and the legendary attempt to turn lead into gold. But the wisest initiates quietly insisted that these images concealed a far deeper mystery. The true laboratory was never the workshop. It was the human mind. The lead was fear, the gold was wisdom, the fire was conscious awareness. Hermes taught that every human being possesses the remarkable ability to transform inner experience. This did not mean denying painful emotions or pretending suffering did not exist. Mental alchemy was never about escaping reality. It was about changing one's relationship to reality until suffering itself became a teacher rather than a tyrant. The greatest miracle happens within. Every person has experienced this mystery without recognizing it. A difficult conversation can appear devastating in one season of life and deeply instructive in another. The event remains unchanged, yet the consciousness meeting it has matured. This is the beginning of alchemy. The external world presents raw material. The inner world determines what it becomes. Ancient Hermetic schools therefore discourage students from asking, "How can I avoid difficulty?" Instead, they asked a far more powerful question: what is this experience trying to refine within me? That single question transforms the direction of thought. Victimhood begins giving way to responsibility. Complaint gradually becomes curiosity. Resistance slowly becomes understanding. The metal enters the fire. Fear often becomes the first material offered to the alchemist. Fear narrows attention until every possibility disappears except danger. It imagines futures that have not yet arrived. It mistakes uncertainty for catastrophe. Left unexamined, fear quietly governs decisions, relationships, careers, and even identity itself. Hermetic teachers did not advise destroying fear. They advised observing it. Anything observed loses its power to rule unconsciously. This lesson echoes across many wisdom traditions. Buddhist mindfulness teaches awareness before attachment. Stoic philosophers encouraged examining impressions before accepting them as truth. Modern psychology similarly recognizes that naming an emotion often weakens its automatic hold over behavior. Observation interrupts automation, reaction strengthens it. Imagine walking through a forest at dusk. A twisted branch lying across the path resembles a serpent. Instantly, the body floods with tension. The heart races, muscles tighten. Yet, as you move closer, the illusion dissolves. Nothing outside changed, only understanding changed. Fear disappeared the moment reality became clear. How many of our daily fears resemble that branch? Mental alchemy begins by asking this question repeatedly. The Hermetic initiate learned another profound discipline, transforming reaction into observation. Most people believe events create emotions directly. The ancient teachers suggested something subtler. Between every event and every reaction exists a silent space. Within that space lives freedom. Someone criticizes you. One mind immediately retaliates. Another pauses. The pause changes everything. Within that pause lies the opportunity to ask, why does this disturb me? What belief has been touched? Is my reaction revealing something about me rather than about the other person? The seeker slowly realizes that every emotional disturbance becomes a doorway into deeper self-knowledge. Nothing is wasted, Even anger possesses hidden instruction. Beneath anger often lies wounded pride, fear, unmet expectation, or forgotten grief. Once these deeper layers become visible, the emotion itself begins transforming. Anger softens into understanding. Fear becomes caution rather than paralysis. Sadness becomes compassion. The energy remains. Its expression changes. This is why the Hermetic masters described emotions as forces rather than enemies. Fire can destroy a village or warm a family. Water can flood a valley or nourish a harvest. Likewise, emotional energy becomes destructive only when unconscious. Consciousness directs power. The ancient alchemists therefore sought mastery, not suppression. They understood that suppressed emotion eventually returns disguised as bitterness, anxiety, resentment, or illness of character. Transformation requires bringing hidden emotions into the light of awareness until they naturally reorganize themselves. Light dissolves confusion. Darkness protects illusion. One practical exercise survived through many contemplative traditions. Before sleeping each evening, the student quietly reviewed the day without judgment. Where did fear appear? Where did impatience arise? Where did gratitude emerge? Where did wisdom replace impulse? Nothing was condemned. Everything was observed. Over time, recurring patterns became unmistakable. The student discovered that the true enemy had never been difficult circumstances. It had been unconscious repetition. Awareness breaks repetition. Try this simple practice yourself. The next time a strong emotion arises, do not immediately obey it. Instead, pause for 3 slow breaths. Ask quietly, "What am I feeling? What story is creating this feeling? What wiser response is possible now?" These 3 questions create a small space between awareness and reaction. That space may appear insignificant, yet entire lives are transformed within it. Small pauses change destinies. The Hermetic teachers believed that no external achievement could compare with the quiet victory of mastering one's own mind. Wealth may disappear, reputation may fade, circumstances inevitably change. But a consciousness trained in observation carries its freedom everywhere. No one can steal inner mastery. Ancient tradition tells of a young initiate entrusted with guarding a sacred flame inside an Egyptian temple. One night, a violent storm swept through the city. Winds howled, rain battered the stone walls. Terrified, the apprentice rushed to his master, convinced the fire would surely be extinguished. The elder calmly entered the sanctuary. The flame still burned. Protected by carefully placed stone walls, it flickered but never failed. The master turned toward his student. The storm was never your greatest danger. The panic was. Guard the inner flame first. The outer fire will follow. Years later, the student admitted that on that night he learned more about himself than from every scroll he had studied before. For he discovered that the greatest alchemy does not happen when the storm disappears. It happens when the heart remains steady while the storm continues. Chapter 6. The Hidden Architecture of Belief. Every magnificent temple begins with an invisible blueprint. Before the first stone is lifted, before pillars rise toward the sky, before walls take shape, an unseen design quietly determines what will eventually stand. The Hermetic teachers believed the same principle governs every human life. Invisible beliefs become visible realities. Most people spend their days trying to change external circumstances while leaving untouched the inner architecture from which those circumstances are continually interpreted and approached. Yet every decision emerges from an assumption. every assumption from a belief, and every belief gradually becomes identity. Life follows hidden foundations. This progression unfolds almost unnoticed. Identity creates expectation. Expectation creates perception. Perception creates action. Action creates destiny. The sequence appears simple. Its consequences are profound. Consider two apprentices entering the same school. One secretly believes, "I am capable of learning." The other quietly believes, "I always fail." Both receive identical instruction. Both possess similar ability. Yet over time, their lives begin diverging dramatically. The first notices opportunities. The second notices obstacles. The first interprets mistakes as lessons. The second interprets mistakes as proof of inadequacy. Nothing outside has changed. The blueprint has. Hermetic wisdom insisted that beliefs rarely announce themselves openly. They operate silently beneath awareness, influencing attention long before conscious thought begins. Modern psychology offers similar observations. Expectations shape what we notice. Confirmation bias encourages us to collect evidence supporting existing assumptions. The mind quietly searches for proof that its current worldview is correct. Belief becomes a lens. Through that lens, we interpret every conversation, every challenge, every relationship, and every possibility. This explains why two individuals can inhabit remarkably different worlds while living side by side. One expects generosity and notices kindness. Another expects betrayal and notices suspicion. Reality contains both. Attention selects which becomes dominant. The architecture deepens further because identity itself grows from repeated stories. If someone continually says, "I am impatient," "I am unlucky," or "I am broken," these statements gradually cease being descriptions of temporary experiences. They become foundations upon which future behavior unconsciously rests. Identity directs behavior. Behavior strengthens identity. The cycle feeds itself. Ancient teachers therefore urged seekers to examine not only their thoughts, but the identities hidden beneath those thoughts. Who do you believe yourself to be? Where did that belief originate? Does it still deserve your loyalty? These questions are not merely philosophical, they are architectural. Imagine an old house built upon weakened foundations. Instead of repairing the base, the owner repeatedly paints the walls, replaces the furniture, and decorates every room. Outwardly, the home appears improved, yet beneath it the structure continues sinking. Soon cracks return. No decoration can replace a solid foundation, so it is with consciousness. Lasting transformation begins beneath behavior, within the beliefs quietly supporting it. This does not mean every challenge results from personal belief. Life contains genuine hardship, uncertainty, loss, and injustice. The Hermetic tradition never denied this. Instead, it taught that while circumstances may not always be chosen, the architecture through which we meet them can continually evolve. Character rebuilds foundations. Every courageous decision slightly alters identity. Every act of integrity reinforces trust in oneself. Every moment of compassion reshapes perception. Slowly, a new blueprint emerges. Destiny changes not because magic intervenes, but because the person making daily choices has quietly become someone different, one belief at a time. The practical invitation offered by Hermetic teachers was surprisingly direct. Whenever you hear yourself saying, "I am," pause before completing the sentence. Ask whether those words describe your deepest identity or merely your current experience. "I feel afraid" differs greatly from "I am fearful." "I experienced failure" differs greatly from "I am a failure." Language builds architecture. Choose it carefully. Ancient records preserve the story of an elderly temple builder renowned throughout Egypt. Young craftsmen admired the beauty of his structures and eagerly asked for the secret of his success. The old architect led them beneath a newly completed sanctuary. There, hidden below the magnificent columns, lay enormous stones no visitor would ever see. One apprentice asked, "Why spend such effort on what remains buried forever?" The master gently rested his hand upon the unseen foundation. "Because everything above depends upon everything below. The people will admire the pillars, but the temple will stand because of the stones they never notice." The apprentices fell silent. Years later, they finally understood that the greatest structures in the world are always supported by what remains invisible. So, too, with the human spirit. Destiny is rarely built by dramatic moments. It is quietly constructed by the hidden architecture of belief that no one else can see, but upon which every future choice inevitably rests. Chapter 7. The power of imagination. Among the many gifts entrusted to humanity, none has been more misunderstood than imagination. Modern culture often treats it as entertainment, fantasy, or the pastime of children. Yet the ancient mystery schools regarded imagination as one of the soul's highest faculties, a sacred bridge between the invisible world of possibility and the visible world of action. Before every temple was built, it existed first within the mind of its architect. Before every civilization rose, someone imagined a different future. Before every act of courage changed history, it lived silently within the heart of an individual long before becoming reality. Creation begins unseen. Hermes Trismegistus taught that the universe itself emerged through divine mind before appearing in visible form. The Hermetic initiate therefore understood imagination not as escape from reality, but as participation in creation itself. Every meaningful achievement begins twice, first inwardly, then outwardly. The unseen always precedes the seen. This principle appears across many wisdom traditions. Plato spoke of the realm of forms, where every perfect pattern exists before its earthly expression. Ancient artisans often spent months visualizing their work before touching stone or wood. Builders studied proportion inwardly before raising monuments that would survive thousands of years. The imagination became the workshop of destiny. Most people unknowingly use this sacred faculty against themselves. Instead of imagining wisdom, they rehearse fear. Instead of envisioning courage, they repeatedly picture failure. Their minds become theaters where the same painful scenes are performed endlessly until those imagined possibilities quietly influence real decisions. What the mind rehearses, the character remembers. This is not magic, it is psychology. Modern neuroscience suggests that vividly imagined experiences can activate many of the same neural pathways involved in actual experience. Athletes mentally rehearse performances before competition. Musicians imagine difficult passages before stepping onto the stage. Surgeons visualize procedures before entering the operating room. The ancients discovered something remarkably similar through contemplation rather than laboratories. The inner rehearsal shapes the outer response. Yet Hermetic imagination differs profoundly from wishful thinking. It never encouraged escaping responsibility or fantasizing about effortless success. True visualization always prepared the seeker for disciplined action. One first became inwardly what one intended to express outwardly. Character before circumstance. Imagine an archer preparing to release an arrow. Before drawing the bow, he first sees the target clearly. His breathing steadies, his body aligns, his attention gathers into a single point. The arrow follows the vision already established within the mind. Life often unfolds in the same way. Scattered imagination produces scattered effort. Focused imagination produces deliberate action. Ancient temple schools incorporated exercises that today might be called contemplative visualization. At dawn, students entered quiet sanctuaries, illuminated only by soft morning light. Before any philosophical instruction began, they sat in silence until their breathing slowed and their minds became calm. Only then were they invited to picture the person they wished to become. Not wealth, not fame, not power, but wisdom, patience, integrity, compassion, courage. The initiate imagined responding calmly where he once reacted with anger. He pictured speaking truth where fear had previously produced silence. He envisioned offering generosity where selfishness once prevailed. The purpose was not self-deception, it was self-construction, for the Hermetic masters believed that every repeated vision gradually became an internal pattern guiding future choices. Identity follows repeated images. This is why symbols occupied such an important place within the ancient temples. The phoenix reminded students that endings often prepare new beginnings. The lotus taught that purity may emerge from muddy waters. The sun represented illumination, overcoming ignorance. These were not decorations, but living images placed before the imagination to shape character. The soul thinks in symbols. One of the greatest obstacles to imagination is fear, disguised as practicality. Many people refuse to imagine a wiser life because disappointment seems safer than hope. They lower expectations not because reality demands it, but because vulnerability feels dangerous. Yet the ancients warned that a person unable to imagine transformation will rarely pursue it. Vision precedes movement. The imagination, therefore, requires careful guardianship. Whatever repeatedly enters the mind eventually influences the heart. Stories, conversations, habits of attention, and daily reflection all become materials from which the imagination quietly constructs identity. Guard your inner workshop. Ask yourself each evening, what have I been imagining today? Have I rehearsed resentment or forgiveness, scarcity or gratitude, failure or growth, fear or wisdom? These questions gently redirect the imagination toward conscious creation rather than unconscious repetition. The workshop never closes. Ancient Egyptian tradition preserves the story of a young sculptor apprenticed to an elderly temple master. Eager to prove himself, the apprentice rushed to carve magnificent statues from great blocks of stone. Yet each attempt ended in frustration. The old craftsman never criticized him. Instead, each morning he handed the young man a smooth piece of limestone and said, "See the statue before touching the stone." Weeks passed. The apprentice grew impatient. "I cannot understand why I must imagine what is not yet there." The old master smiled and pointed toward a completed statue standing within the temple courtyard. "I did not create this figure. I merely removed everything that did not belong." Only years later did the apprentice understand. The masterpiece had existed within the sculptor's vision long before it emerged from the stone. So too, the wisest version of yourself may already exist, not waiting to be invented, but waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. The World Behind the World. If imagination teaches the seeker to perceive possibility, the next lesson is even more demanding. The Hermetic masters declared that humanity does not merely sleep at night, it often sleeps while awake, eyes open, mind closed. This spiritual sleep has been described in nearly every great tradition. The Buddha spoke of ignorance that keeps people trapped within suffering. Gnostic teachers warned that humanity forgets its true nature beneath layers of illusion. Plato told of prisoners chained inside a cave, believing shadows cast upon a wall to be the whole of reality. Different cultures, one warning. Most people mistake appearances for truth because they have never learned to question the assumptions governing perception. This is the world behind the world. Plato's allegory of the cave remains one of history's most powerful images of awakening. Imagine people who have lived their entire lives chained inside a cavern. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, objects pass before the light, casting moving shadows onto the wall ahead. Having known nothing else, the prisoners believe those shadows constitute reality itself. Then one prisoner is freed. At first, the light blinds him. The journey upward feels painful. Everything familiar begins collapsing. Yet, as his eyes gradually adjust, he discovers trees instead of shadows, sunlight instead of firelight, living beings instead of silhouettes. Reality was always greater than appearance. When he returns to tell the others, they reject him. The shadows remain more comfortable than the truth. So it is with consciousness. Every human being constructs a cave from unquestioned beliefs, inherited opinions, fears, habits, and social conditioning. We begin assuming that because something feels familiar, it must therefore be true. Comfort disguises captivity. The Hermetic initiates insisted that awakening always begins with a single courageous act. Question what seems obvious. Why do I believe this? Who taught me to see the world this way? Does this belief produce wisdom, or merely repetition? These questions loosen the chains of unconscious thinking. Most people never ask them. Instead, they react automatically. An insult creates anger. Praise creates pride. Failure creates despair. Success creates arrogance. Habit follows habit until years pass without genuine awareness. The unconscious mind repeats yesterday. Awareness creates today. Modern psychology describes similar mechanisms. Much of human behavior operates through automatic patterns shaped by past experiences. The brain conserves energy by repeating familiar responses. Helpful habits become efficient. Harmful habits become prisons. Without awareness, repetition appears normal. The Hermetic path sought to interrupt this cycle. Students practiced observing thoughts rather than immediately believing them. They examined emotional impulses before acting upon them. They became curious about recurring patterns instead of identifying with them. Curiosity awakens. Certainty sleeps. The world behind the world, therefore, is not another physical dimension hidden beyond ordinary sight. It is the deeper level of reality concealed beneath automatic perception. Every conversation contains unseen motives. Every conflict contains hidden fears. Every act of kindness reflects invisible character. Every life reveals an inner world expressing itself outwardly. Sorvi deceives. Essence endures. The awakened seeker gradually notices connections once overlooked. Small habits shape enormous outcomes. Quiet thoughts influence spoken words. Hidden assumptions guide visible behavior. Consciousness becomes the unseen architect behind the structures of daily life. Nothing important begins on the surface. Awakening also demands humility. The person emerging from Plato's cave does not become superior to others. He simply realizes how easily appearances deceive everyone, including himself. True awakening, therefore, produces compassion rather than pride. The more clearly one sees, the less eagerly one judges. One practical reflection practiced within certain Hermetic schools was beautifully simple. Whenever encountering conflict, disappointment, or confusion, students silently asked, "What am I not seeing yet?" The question prevented premature certainty. It opened the mind. Often the answer emerged only after patience replaced immediate reaction. Wisdom waits. Ancient tradition tells of an elderly guide leading a group of young seekers through the desert toward a sacred mountain. At sunset, they stopped beside what appeared to be an enormous wall stretching across the horizon. Several students declared, "There is no path forward." The guide smiled, but remained silent until dawn. As the first rays of sunlight reached the landscape, the wall gradually dissolved into ordinary mist drifting across the valley. The obstacle had never existed. Only darkness had made it appear real. The guide quietly spoke, "Many prisons are built from shadows. Wait for light before surrendering." Years later, those words became the student's greatest lesson. For he discovered that awakening rarely requires discovering a new world. It requires seeing the one that has always been there with awakened eyes. Chapter 9. The discipline of inner rule. The greatest kingdoms in history eventually crumbled. Empires rose with astonishing power, only to disappear beneath the weight of time. Mighty rulers who commanded vast armies could not command the passing of seasons. Wealth vanished. Monuments weathered. Dynasties faded into dust. Yet the Hermetic sages spoke of another kingdom, one that neither time nor fortune could conquer. It was the kingdom within. The first throne every seeker must occupy is the throne of his own mind. To Hermes Trismegistus, true mastery was never measured by the ability to influence other people. It was measured by one's ability to remain sovereign over one's own thoughts, emotions, and actions. A person unable to govern himself would eventually become governed by circumstances. Fear would become his ruler. Anger would become his counselor. Impulse would become his law. The greatest empire is inner government. Modern life constantly invites surrender. Endless distractions compete for attention. Every notification demands immediate response. Every opinion insists upon being believed. Every fear seeks to become tomorrow's certainty. Without realizing it, many people no longer choose where their attention rests. Their attention is chosen for them. The Hermetic masters understood that attention is the rarest currency of consciousness. Whatever receives sustained attention gradually shapes identity. The mind quietly becomes like whatever it repeatedly contemplates. Attention becomes destiny. This principle appears throughout history. A musician becomes skilled, not because of occasional inspiration, but because attention repeatedly returns to disciplined practice. A gardener transforms barren ground because daily attention nurtures unseen roots before visible flowers appear. The soul grows in exactly the same way. Whatever you feed expands. Whatever you neglect weakens. Therefore, the initiate learned that guarding attention was not merely a psychological exercise. It was a sacred responsibility. Every morning became an act of choosing. Where shall I place my mind today? Will I nourish gratitude or resentment, wisdom or distraction, patience or urgency? These choices appear insignificant. Repeated daily, they become a lifetime. The Hermetic schools often compared the untrained mind to a wild horse, powerful, beautiful, capable of carrying a traveler across vast distances. Yet without guidance, that same horse runs aimlessly, exhausting both itself and its rider. Discipline does not weaken power, it directs power. Many misunderstand discipline as harsh self-denial. The ancient teachers understood something entirely different. Discipline meant remembering one's highest purpose, even when emotion suggested otherwise, to rise before comfort, to remain silent before anger, to speak truth before convenience, to pause before reaction. Every small act strengthened inner authority. The true master first masters himself. This lesson becomes clearer when we observe ordinary life. Imagine receiving unexpected criticism. One person immediately reacts, defending pride with louder words. Another pauses. He listens carefully. He separates useful insight from unnecessary hostility. He answers calmly rather than emotionally. The event remains identical. The consciousness differs completely. The second individual possesses what the Hermetic tradition called inner rule. Circumstances no longer dictate identity. Identity guides circumstances. Ancient wisdom recognized that silence often reveals greater strength than argument. Silence was never weakness. Properly understood, silence allowed awareness to observe impulses before they hardened into actions. Silence creates space. Within that space, wisdom quietly appears. This practice can be cultivated every day. Before responding to difficult news, pause. Before answering harsh words, breathe. Before making an important decision, observe. Ask quietly, who is speaking within me now? Fear, pride, habit, or understanding? One conscious breath often accomplishes more than 100 hurried reactions. The Hermetic initiates repeated this discipline until it became natural. Eventually, observation preceded impulse almost automatically. They no longer fought every emotion. They simply refused to become enslaved by it. Freedom begins with observation. One practical discipline survives from many contemplative traditions. For a single hour each day, become the witness of your own mind. Notice every recurring complaint. Notice every unnecessary worry. Notice every repeated judgment. Do not condemn them, simply observe. Soon you will discover something astonishing. You are capable of watching your thoughts, which means you are not your thoughts. The witness is greater than the thinking. That realization changes everything. Ancient Egypt preserves the story of a young prince sent to study under an elderly temple master before inheriting the throne. Expecting lessons in politics and warfare, the prince instead found himself sweeping temple floors, carrying water, and sitting silently beside the old teacher for hours. Growing impatient, he finally asked, "When will you teach me how to rule a kingdom?" The master handed him a bowl filled completely with water. "Carry this through the marketplace without spilling a single drop." The prince walked carefully, ignoring merchants shouting his name, musicians playing loudly, and crowds pressing against him. When he returned, not a drop had fallen. The teacher smiled. What did the marketplace look like? The prince admitted he had noticed almost nothing. His entire attention had remained upon the bowl. The master nodded. When you can govern your attention this completely, you will be ready to govern a kingdom. Years later, the prince became known not for military conquest, but for extraordinary wisdom and fairness. When people asked about the source of his calm judgment, he always remembered the bowl of water, for on that ordinary day, he discovered that whoever governs attention quietly governs destiny. Chapter 10. The Hidden Alchemy. Among all the symbols passed down through the Hermetic tradition, none has inspired more mystery than the philosopher's stone. For centuries, people imagined a miraculous object capable of turning ordinary metals into gold, healing illness, and granting extraordinary longevity. Kings financed expeditions searching for it. Alchemists devoted entire lifetimes pursuing it. Legends multiplied until the symbol became almost inseparable from fantasy. Yet the wisest Hermetic masters repeatedly whispered the same forgotten truth. The philosopher's stone was never merely a stone. It was consciousness awakened. The greatest transformation does not happen to matter. It happens to the soul. This is the hidden alchemy. Every human life contains raw material waiting to be transformed. Fear, failure, loss, disappointment, grief, shame. Most people spend enormous energy trying to avoid these experiences. The Hermetic initiate approached them differently. He asked, "What gold hides within this lead?" Every hardship contains hidden instruction. This does not mean suffering is inherently good. Pain remains painful. Loss remains heartbreaking. Injustice remains real. Hermetic wisdom never glorified suffering. Instead, it insisted that adversity presents a choice. We may become bitter, or we may become wiser. The same fire that melts wax strengthens steel. Consciousness determines which occurs. The Emerald Tablet speaks mysteriously of separating the subtle from the gross. Many interpreted this as a chemical instruction. Hermetic philosophers increasingly understood it as an inner process. Separate truth from illusion, wisdom from fear, awareness from reaction. The seeker gradually learns to distinguish temporary emotion from enduring character, clarity from confusion, essence from appearance. This is genuine refinement. Every difficult season becomes a furnace. The question is never whether the fire exists. The question is what emerges after passing through it. Ancient alchemists often described three symbolic stages. The first was dissolution. Old assumptions collapse. Certainties disappear. Identity feels uncertain. Many mistake this stage for failure. It is actually preparation. The second stage was purification. Habits are questioned, motives examined, character refined. What no longer serves quietly falls away. Finally comes integration. The individual returns to ordinary life, outwardly unchanged, yet inwardly transformed. The same world appears entirely different because the observer has become different. Gold was never outside. It was revealed within. Modern psychology echoes this ancient insight through the study of post-traumatic growth. Many individuals who endure profound hardship later report deeper compassion, greater appreciation for life, stronger relationships, and renewed purpose. The pain itself did not create wisdom automatically. Their response did. Transformation is chosen. This principle applies even within ordinary frustrations. A disagreement becomes patience. Failure becomes humility. Loneliness becomes self-discovery. Waiting becomes trust. Each experience offers raw material. Consciousness becomes the alchemist. The Hermetic masters therefore urged seekers never to ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead ask, "What is this asking of me?" The first question often produces resentment. The second produces growth. Small changes in perspective create enormous changes in destiny. The philosopher's stone is discovered each time awareness transforms reaction into understanding, fear into courage, pride into humility, scarcity into gratitude, hatred into compassion. Nothing magical has occurred, yet everything has changed. The world mirrors the transformed consciousness. One practical exercise was offered to every initiate leaving the temple. At the close of each day, write down one difficulty you experienced. Beside it, write one virtue that difficulty invited you to develop. Perhaps impatience invited patience. Perhaps disappointment invited resilience. Perhaps uncertainty invited faith. Repeat this daily. Over months, you begin recognizing that life's greatest teacher often arrives disguised as inconvenience. The furnace becomes your classroom. Ancient tradition tells of an elderly goldsmith living near Alexandria. Young apprentices watched him place dull, unremarkable ore into an intensely hot furnace. One impatient student asked, "Master, how do you know when the gold has become pure?" The old craftsman continued tending the fire without looking away. Finally, he answered softly, "When I can see my own reflection in it." Years later, one apprentice realized the deeper meaning hidden within those words. Life itself is the furnace. Every trial removes another layer of illusion. Every act of courage burns away another layer of fear. Every moment of honest self-examination reveals more of the person we were always capable of becoming. At last, after years of quiet refinement, the seeker looks into the mirror of consciousness and discovers not someone entirely new, but the luminous self that had been hidden beneath the impurities all along. That is the final secret of Hermetic alchemy. The true philosopher's stone has never been found in laboratories or buried beneath ancient temples. It has always rested within the awakened human spirit. Chapter 11. The Keeper of Wisdom. Every sacred manuscript eventually reaches a point where reading must end, not because there is nothing left to learn, but because there comes a moment when knowledge demands embodiment. The Hermetic masters quietly understood a truth that countless seekers overlooked. The highest purpose of wisdom was never to fill the memory. It was to transform the person who carried it. The scroll was never the destination. You were. For years, the initiate studies symbols, principles, sacred geometry, parables, silence, and the hidden laws governing consciousness. He memorizes passages from the Corpus Hermeticum. He contemplates the Emerald Tablet. He meditates upon the 7 principles. Yet the elders patiently remind him that possessing wisdom is not the same as becoming wise. Knowledge changes the mind. Embodiment changes the soul. There is a profound difference between someone who can explain courage and someone who remains courageous when life becomes uncertain. There is a difference between speaking beautifully about compassion and quietly forgiving when no one is watching. There is a difference between discussing awareness and actually living from awareness every ordinary day. Hermeticism was never designed to produce scholars alone. It sought to produce living examples. The Codex comes alive. The ancient temples, therefore, measured progress differently than the modern world often does. They rarely asked how many scrolls a student had read. Instead, they observed how he responded when insulted, disappointed, frightened, praised, or tempted. The true examination was life itself. Anyone can appear wise in silence. Character reveals itself in difficulty. One elder reportedly told his students, "When your enemies cannot steal your peace, your training has begun." The statement puzzled many novices. They assumed mastery meant extraordinary mystical experiences, hidden rituals, or secret ceremonies. Instead, they discovered that genuine initiation often looks surprisingly ordinary: pattern listening, measured speech, honest labor, compassion without recognition, integrity without applause, quiet consistency. The extraordinary hides inside the ordinary. This is why the Hermetic path often appears invisible. The deepest transformation rarely announces itself dramatically. It unfolds through thousands of unnoticed decisions, choosing understanding over resentment, choosing patience over irritation, choosing responsibility over blame, choosing truth over convenience. Each choice inscribes another line within the living manuscript of character. The soul writes daily. The greatest danger facing every seeker is believing that wisdom belongs exclusively to extraordinary moments. Many wait for a perfect meditation, a profound vision, or a life-changing revelation before believing they have truly begun. The Hermetic masters gently challenged this illusion. The sacred is already here. Every conversation becomes practice. Every disappointment becomes instruction. Every sunrise becomes initiation. Every ordinary moment offers another opportunity to embody what has been learned. Nothing is too small. A gardener tending flowers with complete attention practices mentalism. A parent comforting a frightened child practices correspondence. A craftsman patiently refining his work practices rhythm. A merchant choosing honesty over profit practices cause and effect. The Hermetic principles cease being philosophy. They become life itself. The manuscript enters the hands. Eventually, it enters the heart. Finally, it disappears completely because the seeker himself becomes its living expression. This explains why the wisest individuals throughout history often appeared remarkably simple. They no longer needed impressive words because their lives communicated what books struggled to express. Presence replaced performance, silence replaced argument, service replaced self-importance. The quiet person often teaches most. Many traditions preserve this same insight. Confucius emphasized cultivating virtue until goodness became natural. Buddhist teachers spoke of becoming the teaching rather than merely repeating it. The Desert Fathers believed the transformed life itself became the greatest sermon. Different paths, one destination. The Hermetic initiate, therefore, developed simple daily disciplines that gradually united thought, speech, and action. Morning silence before speaking, gratitude before ambition, observation before judgment, reflection before sleep. Each practice gently reminded the seeker that consciousness requires continual refinement. Mastery is maintained. It is never completed. Imagine a beautifully crafted musical instrument. Left untouched for years, it gradually loses its perfect tuning. Dust gathers, strings weaken, wood responds to changing seasons. Likewise, consciousness requires continual care. Awareness must be renewed, humility must be protected, compassion must be practiced. The living codex continues writing itself each day. One practical exercise concludes every evening. Ask quietly, did my words reflect my deepest values? Did my actions resemble the person I hope to become? Where did fear speak louder than wisdom? Where did love quietly prevail? These questions do not condemn, they refine. The Hermetic path has always been less about perfection than faithful refinement, small corrections, great transformation. Ancient Egypt tells of an elderly temple scribe whose manuscripts were admired throughout the kingdom. Young students traveled great distances, hoping to learn the secret behind his flawless writing. Expecting complicated techniques, they instead watched the old man carefully clean his writing tools every evening before leaving the temple. One apprentice finally asked, "Master, why spend so much time caring for instruments that will only become dirty again tomorrow?" The old scribe smiled gently. "I am not preparing the brush, I am preparing the hand." Years later, his students understood the daily ritual had never been about ink. It had always been about character. For each evening, the scribe quietly reminded himself that every new day deserved clean hands, a clear mind, and an undefended heart. In time, the manuscripts he copied became forgotten, but the man he became remained unforgettable. Chapter 12. The Greatest Hermetic Secret. Every mystery school preserved one final teaching. It was never spoken first. It could not be understood at the beginning of the journey. Only after years of observation, discipline, contemplation, and inner refinement did the seeker become ready to hear it. The greatest Hermetic secret is astonishingly simple. Reality changes. When consciousness changes, this statement has often been misunderstood. Some have imagined it promises magical control over the external world. Others have dismissed it as poetic symbolism. The Hermetic masters intended neither interpretation. They spoke of something both subtler and more profound. The world you inhabit is inseparable from the consciousness through which you experience it. Chanchen the observer. The observed begins appearing differently. Consider two travelers walking through the same village. One notices poverty, conflict, and decay. Another notices generosity, resilience, and quiet beauty. The streets remain identical. The people remain identical. The difference lies not within the village, but within perception. Consciousness determines experience. This principle echoes throughout the corpus hermeticum. The all is mind, not because physical reality is imaginary, but because every human encounter with reality is filtered through awareness. Fear interprets uncertainty as danger. Wisdom interprets uncertainty as possibility. Gratitude discovers abundance where resentment sees only scarcity. The world silently reflects the lens through which it is viewed. The mirror never begins first. The seeker does. This realization changes the purpose of spiritual practice entirely. Meditation no longer becomes an escape. It becomes clarification. Study no longer becomes accumulation. It becomes remembrance. Silence no longer becomes emptiness. It becomes listening. Every practice points inward. Every symbol points inward. Every sacred story points inward. The Codex was never asking you to worship ancient wisdom. It was inviting you to awaken it. For centuries, seekers searched deserts, mountains, forgotten temples, hidden libraries, and mysterious brotherhoods, hoping to uncover the final secret. Yet the Hermetic teachers repeatedly smiled at this endless search, because what was sought had quietly accompanied the seeker from the beginning. The treasure traveled with the traveler. The ancient phrase, "Know thyself," therefore becomes the meeting place of every wisdom tradition. The Upanishads invite self-realization. Buddhism invites awakening. The Gnostic texts speak of remembering the divine spark. Hermeticism calls it gnosis. Different words, one invitation. Now the consciousness through which you know everything else. The final revelation is not that you gain a new identity. It is that you stop confusing yourself with every temporary identity you have collected. Thoughts come and go. You remain. Emotions rise and fall. You remain. Success arrives. Failure follows. You remain. The witness remains untouched. This is freedom, not freedom from life, freedom within life. Imagine standing beside a perfectly still lake at dawn. When the surface is disturbed, The mountains appear broken, distorted, fragmented. The mountains themselves have not changed. Only the water has. As the surface grows still, the reflection quietly returns. The Hermetic masters believed consciousness resembles that lake. Stillness reveals reality. Agitation distorts it. The work has never been forcing the world to become clearer. The work has always been calming the mind that perceives it. This is why the greatest Hermetic miracle is not extraordinary power. It is extraordinary clarity, the ability to meet praise without vanity, loss without despair, success without pride, conflict without hatred, uncertainty without fear. Such a person becomes impossible to manipulate because his peace no longer depends entirely upon external conditions. His authority comes from within. How then should one leave the Hermetic path? Not by withdrawing from ordinary life, but by entering ordinary life differently. Walk more slowly, listen more deeply, judge less quickly, id more quietly. Observe before reacting, deprecate before complaining, love without demanding certainty. The Codex continues wherever consciousness remains awake. Perhaps this has been the purpose of every chapter, not merely to explain ancient philosophy, not merely to preserve forgotten teachings, but to remind you of something older than memory itself. The wisdom you admired in Hermes, the stillness you recognized within the temples, the courage you discovered in every sacred story, the light you searched for inside forgotten manuscripts, was never separated from you. It waited patiently beneath distraction. It waited beneath fear. It waited beneath endless thinking, waiting for remembrance. Ancient tradition tells of an old Hermetic teacher who, after decades of guiding students, gathered them together for one final lesson. Each expected a secret ritual, a hidden symbol, or a final scroll never before revealed. Instead, the teacher silently placed a polished bronze mirror in the center of the room. One by one, the students looked into it. Confused, they asked, "Master, where is the final teaching?" The old man smiled with remarkable tenderness. "You have been reading it all your life." Then he quietly extinguished the temple lamps. Only the morning sun remained, and in that gentle light, each student understood the greatest Hermetic secret had never been hidden inside ancient manuscripts. The manuscripts had always been pointing toward the awakened consciousness capable of reading them. For the final codex was never written on papyrus. It was written within the human spirit itself.